Millionaire's bride refuses to be served by black waitress. Then the groom grabs the mic. The reception hall shimmered with white and gold, its ceiling veiled with gauzy chiffon that floated like mist under the warm glow of chandeliers. Outside, a line of luxury vehicles curved along the driveway like polished trophies, their drivers standing stiffly, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. Inside, a four-tiered cake stood at attention on a round table, flanked by champagne towers and waitstaff in perfectly pressed uniforms. Among the waitstaff was Amina. She was tall and graceful, with tightly coiled hair pulled into a neat low bun and eyes that carried the kind of quiet resilience that only years of navigating the world with her head held high could give. Dressed in black slacks and a crisp white shirt, she moved like a dancer, confident, precise, unbothered by the opulence around her. This wasn't her first high society wedding. Probably wouldn't be her last. But this one would be different, because this was their wedding. Victoria Kensington and Nathaniel Clark. The couple gracing the covers of lifestyle magazines, their names whispered at private clubs and Forbes galas. Victoria, daughter of East Coast real estate moguls, and Nathaniel, the son of a Detroit auto shop owner turned tech magnate. An unlikely match that had quickly become a media sensation. They were called the New American Aristocracy. But beneath the curated photographs and choreographed interviews, something quieter and darker was at play. Amina was just finishing pouring a glass of sparkling water for an elderly guest when she heard the sharp click of high heels approaching behind her, followed by a pause, then a cold voice that sliced through the ambient jazz like a shard of ice. "Excuse me, you." "Yes, you," the voice said, coated with a smile that didn't quite reach the speaker's eyes. Amina turned, politely. "Yes, ma'am." Victoria stood in front of her, stunning in her custom Vera Wang gown. Her platinum blonde hair swept to one side in effortless waves. She looked at Amina the way one might glance at a misplaced object. Curious, irritated, suspicious. "I don't mean to be rude," Victoria began, her tone implying quite the opposite. "But I specifically asked the coordinator for all the servers at our wedding to be, well, discreet. Background. Unobtrusive. You're just a bit too prominent." There was a pause. A hush seemed to fall over the nearby tables. Amina blinked, but her face didn't change. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm just doing my job." Victoria's smile thinned. "I'm sure you are. But if you wouldn't mind switching with someone else, maybe someone less visible during the photos, I'd really appreciate it." Amina didn't respond right away. She glanced over Victoria's shoulder, where the photographer was positioning bridesmaids, none of whom seemed to notice what was happening. She took a deep breath. "I was assigned this section," she said calmly. "If you'd like to speak with the catering manager, I'd be happy to fetch him for you." Victoria's cheeks colored slightly, not from embarrassment, but annoyance. "No need. I'll handle it." And with that, she turned sharply on her heel, muttering something under her breath that Amina couldn't quite hear. But it didn't matter. She didn't need to. She'd heard versions of it before, spoken in various shades of entitlement, by women who smiled through their bigotry like it was just another accessory. Amina exhaled slowly, grounding herself. She had rent to pay. Her younger sister's textbooks were sitting in her Amazon cart, waiting to be ordered. This wasn't personal. It never was. At least that's what she always told herself. Across the room, the groom, Nathaniel Clark, stood near the bar in quiet conversation with his uncle. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark brown eyes and a sharp jaw softened only by the slight stubble he hadn't quite managed to shave that morning. From where he stood, he saw everything. The stiff exchange, the way Victoria's shoulders bristled, the way Amina stood still, composed but tight at the jaw. He'd seen that look before. He made his way to the back hallway, where the catering staff took breaks between rounds. Amina was standing there now, arms folded, gazing at the floor as though the tiles had all the answers. "Miss," he said gently. Amina looked up, caught off guard. Nathaniel cleared his throat. "I'm Nathaniel. I saw what happened. I'm really sorry." She hesitated. "It's okay. You don't have to apologize." "No," he said more firmly now. "I do. That wasn't okay. And it's not the kind of wedding I wanted." Amina gave a short, tired smile. "You'd be surprised how often things like this happen. I'm used to it." "Doesn't make it right," he said, shaking his head. "People can be so wrapped up in appearances, in managing how things look, that they forget the value of how things feel, how people are treated." She studied him for a moment. "Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that." Just then, a voice called from the speakers, "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats for the newlyweds' toast." Nathaniel looked down the hall, then back at her. "I hope you'll stick around for that," he said. "It might be worth hearing." With that, he walked off, his shoulders squared, the calm, practiced poise of a man used to speaking to crowds. But something in his eyes flickered with storm. Amina didn't know why, but a chill ran down her spine. She had a feeling this wasn't going to be like any other toast she'd heard before. The crowd buzzed with anticipation as the lights dimmed slightly, the soft jazz fading into the gentle clink of champagne flutes being lifted from trays. Guests returned to their seats, faces flushed with wine and wonder, murmuring about the decor, the venue, and the bride's dress. Every detail meticulously curated to project the illusion of perfection. Victoria glided back into the ballroom with a radiant smile stretched across her face like porcelain. Flawless, but fragile. Her bridesmaids trailed behind her like petals drifting in a slow breeze, all pastel chiffon and practiced elegance. No one would have guessed that, moments earlier, she had seethed with quiet irritation, demanding the coordinator remove that server from the room entirely. Amina, however, had not left. Despite the tense exchange, the catering manager, an older black man named Terrence who had been in the hospitality business longer than Victoria had been alive, refused to reassign her. "She's the best I've got," he said, standing his ground with a coolness forged over decades of silent battles. "And she stays." So Amina stayed, though now with a different posture. Not defeated, not angry, just watchful. The way someone watches a storm cloud that might not rain, but might tear down a house. The MC's voice rose above the crowd. "And now, folks, it's time for a few words from the newlyweds." Applause swelled. Victoria beamed as she stepped forward, her diamond bracelet catching the light like fireworks on glass. She took the mic first, speaking in her clear, practiced tone. "I just want to thank all of you for being here to share this perfect, magical day with us. It's been a dream come true. From the dress fittings in Paris to the custom cake flown in from Milan. Every moment has been filled with love, style, and unforgettable memories." More applause. A few obligatory whoops from friends. One of the bridesmaids dabbed her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Victoria turned to Nathaniel, handing him the microphone with a graceful tilt of her wrist. "And now," she said, "my husband has a few words." She smiled, expecting him to thank her family, maybe tell a charming story from their first date, drop a line about destiny, love, forever. But Nathaniel didn't follow the script. He stood there for a moment, silent, one hand resting in his pocket, the other holding the mic loosely by his side. His gaze traveled across the room, not just to the front tables filled with executives, politicians, and glossy influencers, but to the far corners, where staff members stood quietly, alert and invisible. And then his eyes stopped on Amina. She wasn't hiding, but she wasn't exactly standing out either. She was simply doing her job, watching, listening, existing. He raised the microphone. "I had this whole speech prepared," he began, his voice steady but low, "about love and fate, and how sometimes the universe brings two people together against all odds." There was polite laughter. Victoria tilted her head slightly, the smile still plastered on her lips but beginning to twitch. "But as I was standing here just now," Nathaniel continued, "I realized something didn't feel right. Not about the vows. Not about the ceremony. About the silence." The room shifted, not physically but in mood. A ripple of unease passed through the air. "I've built my life on a simple principle: treat people with decency. Not based on their bank account, their background, or what their last name sounds like. Just human decency." He paused, taking a slow breath. "And today I saw someone I love speak to another person like they were furniture. Like they were disposable. Like they didn't belong here." Victoria's smile dropped, her cheeks paling just slightly. She opened her mouth to speak, but Nathaniel held up a hand. Not in anger, but in command. "I saw Amina, yes, I learned her name, spoken to with disrespect. I watched it, I felt it, and I said nothing in that moment. But I won't stay quiet now." Gasps scattered through the audience like dropped glass. "She's not just a server. She's a person. She's someone's daughter, maybe someone's sister. She woke up today and came here to work hard, to help make our day special. And instead, she was treated like an inconvenience." Nathaniel turned slightly, scanning the rows of perfectly dressed guests. "If this is the kind of silence we accept at our weddings, in our homes, at our dinner tables, then we're no better than the world we claim we want to change. Money doesn't mean morality, and status doesn't equal soul." Victoria's arms were crossed now, her lips a tight line, her posture rigid. "I love you, Victoria," he said quietly. "Or at least, I thought I did." Someone coughed nervously near the back. Someone else pulled out their phone, subtly recording. "But love without respect is not love. It's just illusion. And I refuse to live a life of illusion." He turned back to Amina, whose face was unreadable now, her hands clasped in front of her apron. "I'm sorry," he said, and this time it wasn't to the crowd. It was to her. He placed the mic on the edge of the table, its final thud echoing through the room. Then he walked away from the podium, straight through the center of the ballroom, past stunned guests, past the cake, past the tower of champagne. And for the first time that night, the room fell completely silent. No music, no applause, just truth hanging in the air, heavy and trembling. For a long, impossible moment, no one moved. It was as though Nathaniel's words had stripped the room of oxygen, leaving the chandeliers flickering in stunned silence, leaving the guests sitting there, frozen between politeness and disbelief, between the social instinct to pretend everything was fine and the sinking realization that something irreversible had just happened. And in the very center of it all, Victoria stood, still holding the empty mic stand with her slender fingers curled around it like a wine glass she might hurl at a wall. Her expression, once radiant and unshakably controlled, now betrayed a furious confusion she hadn't prepared for. Because this moment, this crack in the illusion, it wasn't part of the plan. Her mother was already standing from the front table, her pearls swinging slightly as she leaned toward Victoria with wide eyes and an urgent whisper. "Go after him. Don't just stand there." But Victoria didn't move. Her lips parted as if to respond, then closed again. Across the room, guests exchanged awkward glances. A bridesmaid, Jocelyn, the one who'd always bragged about her PR job and the time she almost met Oprah, leaned in toward another and muttered, "He'll come back. He's just making a point." But even as she said it, her voice betrayed doubt. Amina, still standing at her post by the side wall, felt every eye in the room swing toward her like an invisible wind. She was used to being ignored, invisible, silent. It was part of the job. You pour water, you clear plates, you smile. You are present, but not known. Essential, but not seen. But not tonight. Tonight, a man had pointed to her, had spoken her name into a microphone heard by CEOs and senators and magazine editors, and in doing so had broken some unwritten rule. Not just about class, not just about race, but about comfort, about the hierarchy of who was allowed to matter in a room like this. Terrence, the catering manager, approached her slowly, concern etched into his brow. "You all right?" he asked, his voice low. "I think so," she replied, though her chest was still tight, her hands slightly trembling. "You don't have to finish the shift," he said. "You can go home. I'll cover for you." But Amina shook her head. "I finish what I start." Terrence nodded, a flicker of something like pride in his eyes. Meanwhile, Nathaniel had already exited the ballroom and walked briskly down the long marble hallway, past portraits of Victoria's ancestors. Paintings hung in heavy gold frames, all cold eyes and inherited power. He stepped outside into the evening air, his breath clouding for a moment in the gentle coastal wind. His bow tie was loosened now, one hand running through his neatly cropped hair. He didn't feel regret. Not exactly. He felt clarity, sharp, sudden, like sunlight through a crack in a boarded-up window. Behind him, the doors swung open. "Are you out of your mind?" Victoria's voice rang out like a whip. He turned slowly. She stormed toward him, heels striking the marble like gunfire, veil bouncing behind her like a ghost too angry to let go. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Nathaniel, do you have any idea how long I planned this day? How many favors I called in? How much money my parents put down for this?" Nathaniel's gaze didn't flinch. "I know," he said. "That's exactly the problem." Her voice dropped an octave. Cold. Dangerous. "Don't make this about her. Don't you dare reduce our wedding to some political statement." "It's not political," he said softly. "It's personal. And if you can't see the difference, then maybe you never really saw me at all." Victoria shook her head, a cruel smile tugging at her lips. "So what now? You think you're some kind of hero? You walk out of your own wedding to prove a point? To impress a waitress?" His jaw tightened. "Don't call her that." "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You're not some revolutionary, Nate. You're a clerk, a millionaire. You wear watches that cost more than her entire annual salary. Don't pretend like you live in her world." "I don't," he said. "But I remember where I came from. I remember watching my dad get ignored in boardrooms, spoken over by men who didn't think someone who fixed carburetors for a living could possibly understand equity or strategy. I remember my mother crying when a shop owner followed her through the aisles like she might steal something. You know what they told me? Never forget who you are, and never let money buy your silence." Victoria's face hardened. She crossed her arms. "So what now? Are you calling it off? You're gonna throw everything away? Our families, the business ties, our future?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in months, maybe ever, he realized something devastating. He didn't recognize the woman in front of him. "I'm not throwing it away," he said quietly. "I'm walking away. There's a difference." She stared at him, stunned. The wind tugged gently at the edges of her gown. Back inside, The guests were beginning to murmur more loudly now, shifting in their chairs, checking their phones. Someone whispered that the groom had left. Someone else said there was an incident with the staff. Rumors were already multiplying like wildfire. And Amina, still standing quietly, still doing her job, picked up an empty flute from a side table, placed it on her tray, and kept moving. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know what Nathaniel's speech would mean, if anything. But something had shifted in the air. Not just for her. For everyone. The evening was unraveling thread by thread. What had begun as the most anticipated society wedding of the season had descended into quiet chaos. The photographers, unsure whether to keep snapping or discreetly disappear, lingered near the ballroom's edge, their lenses still trained on the empty podium. The live band, who had been rehearsing the couple's first dance song all week, now stood by in awkward silence, watching as servers, most of them far too seasoned to be surprised, moved with careful precision, continuing the flow of wine and plates, as though the foundations of the event hadn't just fractured at the seams. But beneath the careful facade, there was a ripple, an invisible shift in posture, in glances, in breath. Victoria had returned. Not with Nathaniel. Alone. She walked back into the ballroom without a smile, without a word. Her train trailed behind her like a wounded banner. The chatter around her ceased instantly, as though the guests were unsure whether to console her or congratulate her for keeping composure in a moment that had clearly spiraled out of her control. Her mother followed closely, whispering fiercely into her ear. Victoria didn't respond. She sat, straight-backed, chin high, the picture of silent fury. Meanwhile, Nathaniel hadn't gone far. He sat now on a low stone bench in the garden just outside the reception hall, where the string lights hung from olive trees and the scent of jasmine clung to the air like perfume. His jacket lay beside him, discarded. His phone buzzed intermittently. Calls from his best man, texts from family, polite messages asking if this was some sort of dramatic stunt. But he wasn't looking at his phone. He was watching the caterers finish setting the dessert table through the window. And he was thinking, not about the business deals this wedding was meant to secure, not about how it would play on social media, not even about what his parents would say when they found out what had happened. He was thinking about his grandmother, how she used to take him on walks in downtown Detroit, holding his hand while strangers looked through her like she was invisible. How she used to whisper to him, "You can change things, baby. Not everything, but something, and that'll be enough." He'd grown up believing her. But somewhere between IPOs and Forbes interviews, he had started mistaking success for justice. And tonight had shown him the difference with brutal clarity. The glass door creaked open behind him. He didn't turn, but he heard the footsteps, soft, hesitant. "I didn't mean to interrupt," said a voice. It wasn't Victoria's. It was warmer, lower, familiar. He looked up. Amina stood there, framed by the glow from inside. She still wore her uniform, black slacks, white shirt, apron neatly tied, but something in her bearing had shifted. Not tentative, not angry, just curious, like someone walking into a room they were never invited to, only to find their name carved on the wall. "I thought you might want this," she said, holding out a cup of coffee. He took it. Their fingers brushed, just for a second. "I didn't expect you to come out here," he said. Amina gave a slight smile. "Didn't expect to be part of the story either. But here we are." He looked down into the coffee, then back up at her. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I know," she replied. There was a pause. Crickets chirped somewhere in the hedges. A slow breeze lifted her curls. "You know," she said, sitting on the edge of the low wall across from him, You didn't have to say anything back there. Most people don't. They just pretend they didn't see it. I've pretended before, he said quietly. A lot more than I want to admit. Amina tilted her head. And tonight, I realized I was about to marry someone who could humiliate another person without even flinching. And worse, I almost let it happen without a word. I was so caught up in the illusion, the pageantry, the brand of our lives. I forgot that silence is its own kind of betrayal. She looked at him then, not with sympathy, but with something gentler. Understanding, maybe. Nobody expects you to be perfect, she said. Just honest. He met her eyes. Would it be strange if I told you this is the most honest conversation I've had in months? She chuckled softly. You're at your own wedding reception, and the only person you're talking to is the waitress. I'm talking, he said, to the only person here who hasn't lied to me all day. They both fell silent for a moment, watching the guests inside begin to rise, unsure of whether the wedding would continue, whether there would still be dancing or speeches or cake. I don't know what happens next, Nathaniel admitted. I'm pretty sure I've just derailed the life plan both our families have been building for a year. Maybe that's a good thing, Amina said. He laughed. Maybe it is. Then his expression shifted, serious again. But I do know one thing. What's that? I'm not going back in there to pretend like none of it happened. From inside, the MC tapped the mic again. Awkwardly. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a slight change in the evening schedule. We'll be resuming shortly with dessert and dancing. Nathaniel stood, slipping on his jacket again. I think it's time to say something. Not into a mic this time. You sure? She asked. He nodded. If I don't finish what I started, then it's just another empty gesture. And so they walked back, together, not as bride and groom, not as boss and employee, not even as savior and saved. Just two people who had witnessed something ugly and chose to step into the light instead of hiding behind the chandeliers. As they entered the ballroom again, all heads turned. And Victoria? She stood as if on cue, her face unreadable now. Neither angry nor smug. Just waiting. And Nathaniel? He didn't flinch. The ballroom, once a carefully choreographed theater of champagne flutes, curated floral arrangements, and practiced smiles, had transformed into a stage of reckoning. Nathaniel stood with Amina just a few paces behind him. Her expression was still unreadable yet not hidden. The murmurs in the room died down the moment he stepped forward, all eyes fixed on him. Not with admiration this time, but with tension, curiosity, and something else, anticipation. Victoria remained by the sweetheart table, her train fanned perfectly across the polished floor, the long-stemmed roses around her still untouched. Her mother rose behind her, perhaps thinking she should interrupt, deflect, control, salvage, but Victoria held up a single hand without looking back. Not out of grace, but out of pride. If Nathaniel was going to deliver another speech, she would let him. On her day, because she believed no words could undo the image she had constructed. Nathaniel didn't reach for the mic. He didn't need amplification anymore. He looked around the room, not at the elites in front rows, not at the bridesmaids checking their phones, not even at Victoria, but at the staff. The ones in black and white, holding silver trays, exchanging looks that held more truth than anything in the Kensington vows. I'm not here to perform, he began, his voice firm but calm. I'm here to close a chapter that should never have been written. Someone in the back let out a breath. When I fell in love with Victoria, he said, nodding toward her, I convinced myself that we were from different worlds, yes, but that we shared the same values beneath it all. That what mattered to me, integrity, respect, humanity, mattered to her too. He paused, not out of hesitation, but to make the silence carry its weight. But today I saw the truth, not just in how she spoke to someone doing honest work, but in how many of you reacted to it. With silence, with compliance, with the comfort of looking away. There was movement now, subtle, in the back of the room. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. A few lowered their eyes. "Let me be clear. This isn't just about Amina," he said, gesturing toward her. Though she showed more strength in 5 minutes than most of us do in a year. Amina remained still, not shrinking, not proud, just steady. It's about the world we pretend we're not part of. A world where power protects cruelty, where elegance is used to justify exclusion, where someone like me, someone whose roots come from a mechanic's garage in a red-line neighborhood, is expected to smile through injustice just to keep a seat at a polished table. He took a step forward. "I don't want that seat anymore." A hushed gasp rippled across the room. "I'm walking away from this marriage," he said, eyes locked on Victoria's. "Because if I say I do today, I'd be betraying everything that ever mattered to me, everything my family worked for, everything I worked for. I'd rather stand alone in truth than be applauded in illusion." Victoria didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't faint. She simply looked away, not out of sadness, out of disbelief that someone would dare walk away from her. At the altar, in front of her empire, in her dress, Nathaniel turned back to Amina. He said nothing, but in his silence, there was something that needed no words: respect, admiration, gratitude. And Amina, after a beat, nodded. A small nod, but it carried the weight of a woman who had been stepped over and silenced in rooms like this her entire life, and now stood upright, acknowledged. He walked toward the exit, and this time she followed. Not because he asked, but because she chose to. And behind them, the music never resumed. The band never played the first dance. And the wedding guests would never forget the day a groom left his bride. Not for another woman, but for what was right.